So what we're going to be building here is what I think to be one of the most advanced computers I've ever touched. It's going to be rocking the Intel Core i9, which is one of the highest end CPUs on the board or on the marketplace. It's the 7980XE model, which is a 18 core 32 thread CPU. We are going to be having it powered by the 850 watt EVGA D3 It's fully modular power supply with the X299 Tomahawk AC motherboard. Going into it and cooling the CPU is going to be the Kraken X62 with two 11 gig GeForce GTX 1080 Ti graphics cards. We're going to be using the Corsair Air B540 full-size case. The reason why we're doing this is because we want all the airflow to be going on the inside with none of the important components like the hard drives and anything getting in the way, which is going to be on the inside of the case, going all the way up in a push-pull configuration. So the motherboard that we chose to go with this is Wi-Fi capable, and the way that they do that is by having two antennas. And the neat thing about the antennas is that your case is magnetic or made out of metal. These will just attach to wherever you want them to be, out of sight, out of mind, giving you AC internet speeds. This is the motherboard here. It's got 8 DIMM slots for a total of up to 128 gigs of RAM. The M.2 drive that we'll be using is going to be neatly hidden behind this shroud here. And then we will be putting the graphics cards on these metal PCI boards here. The reason why they're metal is so that they're reinforced, so that the GPUs can't actually sag and damage any products or parts of the motherboard as they hang. So the reason why the i9 is in this small of a box is because Intel knows that you should not be using anything but an aftermarket CPU cooler, be it an air-cooled or an AIO or a full-fledged water cooling system. This thing needs that extra level of cooling, otherwise you'll burn your house down. That's pretty much it. There it is. Expensive piece of hardware. Ridiculously expensive. Careful. Alright, go ahead. This is the CPU installation. Go up and over, and then that lifts up, or at least it should. And then what you want to do here is make sure that the gold triangle is facing this. That's how it gets seated. Go from the sides instead. Like that. Make sure it's seated, give it a little jiggle, make sure it's not moving at all. Try and make sure we're doing this right. Goes in, and then this goes in, and that comes off. Simple. One of the easiest parts of building the computer is the CPU installation, unless you somehow manage to bend the pins or don't put it where the triangle is supposed to go. Cut that.
Give him some love. Toast needs love.
So now for the RAM installation, basically if you're using DDR4 like we are, most of the time you'll find that your DIMM slots only open on one end. These actually do not move. And then you just make sure you're lining the chipset down here with the same indicator on this, because one side's always going to be lower than the other. We're using 32 gigs of G-Skill Trident Z RAM, which is pretty. It's gonna show off some lights, fun stuff like that. It doesn't. It's fighting me. Stop fighting me. Just give it a little. Actually, we should move this to the motherboard box. What I'm doing there is de-static, making sure I have no static charge in my body by touching the side of the computer case. When handling a motherboard, make sure you're not touching any of the contacts or the capacitors or anything that can be easily bent. And then when you push down, it locks into place. Should hear a nice click when you get it installed. What most computer builders do is they will actually install their computer with generally only 1 or 2 DIMM slots, connect everything up, and then make sure it posts to get rid of RAM incompatibility. Like if one of your DIMM slots on your motherboard is bad, that way you can determine if your motherboard needs to be replaced. So with the power supply that we're using, like I was saying, it's fully modular, which means that only the cables that need to be used will be used, and there won't be any excess like sort of cables just kind of hanging around, except for things that may or may not be attached to the case. Fun stuff. Where's my doohickey? Where's my tool? My screwdriver. Thank you. Another neat thing about this case in particular is that there should normally the power supply is mounted on the front panel, like this area over here, but with the way this case is designed, it's out of sight, out of mind, with no real need to do anything else. It just kind of there. Forgot about that thing there. Come on. Come on. That one doesn't want to come. Need a bigger Phillips head. Wow, that's tight. Now I need the X62 liquid cooler, which is sitting beside you, Keith. This will be one of the last parts of the motherboard installation, but what we have to do now is install the back plate of the water cooler, the X62, to the back of the motherboard so that the water cooler itself can sit and create a seal with the CPU. You don't need to see me a lot. So for what we're doing next, this may be different for everyone depending on the socket type that you're using. For this particular build, it's the socket 2066, which if you're not aware, most motherboards use a thing called a backplate to secure your CPU cooler. The 2011 and 2066 socket types do not require this, as they have actually thought ahead, and all you're doing here is installing 4 of these standoff screws directly into the motherboard so that the CPU cooler can sit on it. And all that does is allow it to sit and do its job. Yeah. Oh, that got attached. Take this out. So what we're doing here is now installing the SATA or M.2 SSD into the motherboard. We're using a 250 gig Samsung M.2 960 EVO. You just go in, wiggle it in, wait for it to sit. And then it's flexible like that, so that you can take this little screw here, which should be magnetic, and it is. Oh, reseat it there. And presto, done. What we're doing now is we are going to take the motherboard, since it is now almost finished, and putting it into the computer case itself. A little weird because I don't have a CPU cooler to grab. Just sits like that, and then you attach 8 screws in this case, because our one standoff actually is the support screw, which we actually do not have to do anything with. So 8 screws all together, and then it'll be in the case. So we're nearing the end of the build, and we now have the AIO unboxed, and I have the fans in the orientation that I need them to be, so that the airflow can come into the case and then out through the top. And so what we're doing here is we're going to be installing the fans first, and then we're going to be running the rad in front of that. And this case is really nice because it gives us enough clearance to do so without it touching any important parts of the motherboard itself, and still allowing enough clearance for airflow. So we're nearing the end of the computer build journey. This is the first of 2 GTX 1080 Ti graphics cards that will be running in SLI. Like I said at the beginning of the video, they are sporting 11 gigs of GDDR5X RAM. That will basically allow this computer to do whatever the hell it wants. There is basically no limitations here. That should do it. Should have clicked up. Alright, so the build has come to an end. We finally have Windows installed. We did run into some issues. The motherboard, the X299 AC Tomahawk that we bought, ended up not posting. It kept giving me this error, and I did some troubleshooting, ran it through the mill, and it turned out that the AC antennas would cause a complete just system failure. So we ended up having to disconnect those, install Windows, and go through. After the Windows got installed, we ran the driver disk, and everything seems to be working golden. If you come over here, you can see that all the temperatures are well within reason with the Intel Core i9 Monster 7980XE running at a cool 21 degrees with this 18 core 36 thread beast of a CPU. Everything else is running optimally, no temperature issues whatsoever. And now I'm gonna be giving this computer over to Keith. It's so pretty.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
You're welcome.